I found a letter in Grandma's handwriting, except it wasn't hers. And when I showed Mom, she slammed the box shut and hissed, "You're overreacting." That was the moment I realized my inheritance was gone. But what cut deeper? My sister Lily, the one who used to braid my hair while we whispered secrets in the dark, smirked and said, "Mom's just protecting you." Protecting me? No. They stole everything meant for me and gave it to her. But the part that broke me? They didn't just forge my grandmother's will, they signed it with my name. And when Ethan, the only person who's ever believed in me, held it in his hands and whispered, "This isn't her handwriting," that's when the whole lie began to unravel. They erased me from the story Grandma wrote for me, and they thought I'd stay silent. They have no idea what I found in that basement. The basement was cold, but the truth I uncovered burned hotter than any betrayal upstairs. Funny how one forged signature can ignite a fire that's been waiting to burn for years. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, don't scroll past. Hit like. We need to find each other. 3 months earlier, I used to think my childhood was the kind of life people would envy. A neat, tree-lined street in Portland's suburbs, a house painted pale blue with a wraparound porch, flower boxes spilling with petunias in summer. My mother, Karen Carter, a celebrated chef with thousands of Instagram followers, posting bright snapshots of golden roast chickens and perfectly frosted cakes. Her smile was flawless, always just enough teeth, just enough warmth to look effortless. To the world, we were a family to admire. But inside that house, I learned early on that some smiles were masks. There were 3 of us: Mom, my older sister Lily, and me. And from the moment I could stand on a stool and reach the counter, Lily was the one who belonged in Mom's kitchen. She had her hair tied up in a perfect knot, an apron that never seemed to get dirty, and this calm confidence when she held a knife or whisk. Everyone said she got it from Mom. The way they said it, it sounded like a blessing passed down like a family heirloom. Me? I was the one who hovered at the edges, the helper, the one who fetched bowls, wiped counters, and chopped vegetables, but never quite right. My cuts were uneven, my sauces broke, my dough cracked. I can still hear Mom's voice that afternoon when I was 12, the sunlight pouring through the window, dust motes swirling in the air. I'd tried to make chocolate chip cookies from scratch. The kitchen smelled warm and sweet, and for a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd be proud. She came in, took one bite, and smirked. "Mia, you've got no knack. Leave it to Lily." It was casual for her, a throwaway comment, but to me it was a sentence I carried for years. I laughed it off in front of her, but inside I felt something small and fragile crack. I told myself it was true, that I was clumsy, untalented, better off staying out of the way. Whenever there was a big dinner, Lily and Mom moved around the kitchen like they were reading each other's minds. I stayed on the sidelines, pretending I preferred setting the table or greeting guests. I learned how to smile without showing the disappointment in my chest. The kitchen became both the heart of our home and the place where I felt most like an outsider. Gleaming white counters, copper pots hanging in a neat row, family photos tucked into the edges of the fridge with colorful magnets, Lily holding up her first cake, Mom hugging her after a TV interview. In those pictures, I'm there too, but always in the background, half turned, half lit, like a supporting character in someone else's story. People think the worst betrayals are loud, but I think the quiet ones are worse. The ones that happen so slowly you don't even realize something's being taken from you until it's gone. For me, it wasn't just my confidence in cooking. It was the sense that I had a place in my own family. Years went by, and I convinced myself I was fine. I studied, worked part-time, kept my life neatly separate from Mom's public image. But I could never quite shake the feeling that there was something else, a tension I couldn't name. Sometimes when I caught Mom looking at me, her smile would falter for just a fraction of a second, as if I reminded her of something she didn't like to think about. I'd ask myself why, but there was never an answer. One winter evening, after a dinner where Mom and Lily spent an hour debating the best technique for poaching pears, I lingered in the kitchen alone. The room was still warm from the oven. I ran my hand over the smooth counter, my reflection faint in its shine. In the quiet, I caught myself wondering if I'd ever been more than a shadow to them, if there was ever a moment when Mom saw me, just me, and thought I was enough. And then one day, I found out there was a reason for that look in her eyes. I wasn't searching for it. I wasn't digging for dirt. I just stumbled across a truth so sharp it cut through years of self-doubt in an instant. Something she had kept from me, hidden away with careful hands and a cold precision I didn't think my own mother was capable of. It was the kind of secret that doesn't just make you question what someone's done. It makes you question if you ever really knew them at all. In that moment, my picture-perfect kitchen became something else entirely. The bright counters, the copper pots, the faint scent of vanilla, it all turned heavy, stifling, like the air just before a fire catches. I could almost hear the walls closing in, the hum of the refrigerator turning into a low, threatening growl. I wish I could say I was ready for it, that I'd seen it coming. But the truth is, it hit me like a blow I never saw coming. And once I knew, I couldn't unknow it. The girl who had been content to live in the background, she was gone. I thought I was just clumsy. I thought I just lacked talent, but something in Mom's eyes had always felt off. Now I knew why. And I knew deep down that my life was about to change forever. The kitchen was alive with noise and heat, the kind that seeps into your skin and makes the air feel heavy. Overhead lights cast a warm, honey-colored glow across the gleaming copper pots, each one polished enough to catch distorted reflections of the people moving around me. Steam curled upward from the boiling pasta, fogging the small window above the sink until the garden outside blurred into a smear of dark greens and golds. I stood at the counter, slicing red bell peppers into even strips, the knife's rhythm a steady, solitary beat beneath the layers of laughter and clinking glasses drifting in from the dining room. It was Mom's 52nd birthday, and the whole house looked like one of her perfectly staged Instagram photos. Candles flickered in glass jars along the table, each flame trembling gently in the draft from the back door. White linen draped perfectly over the long table, napkins folded like little sculptures. The smell of roasted garlic mingled with fresh basil and butter, wrapping around me like a net. From my post in the kitchen, I could hear the crowd react as Lily emerged from the hallway, carrying her tiramisu. "Lily, this is divine!" one of Mom's friends called out, her voice spilling into the kitchen like a drop of lemon juice into a cut. I looked over my shoulder just in time to see Mom take the dessert from Lily and set it down with exaggerated care, as if it were a fragile treasure. She pulled Lily into a hug, her laugh low and unfiltered, the kind that showed all her teeth. Her eyes sparkled in the candlelight, then shifted past me like I was nothing more than the refrigerator humming in the background. "Mia, don't spill the sauce, okay?" she said without even meeting my eyes, her tone as casual as someone reminding a child to tie their shoes. Then she turned back to Lily, leaning in as Lily whispered something that made her laugh again. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted the faint tang of iron. The sauce simmered beside me, popping softly, sending up bursts of tomato and basil that should have been comforting but now just mocked me. My hands kept moving, slicing pepper after pepper, though the room seemed smaller than it had a moment ago. I told myself it didn't matter, that this was her night, that I was just here to help. But the truth? It mattered more than I wanted to admit. Every time her gaze slid through me as though I were part of the furniture, it carved something deeper inside me. The laughter in the dining room swelled again, wrapping around the edges of my isolation. I recognized Lily's voice, confident, light, carrying over the rest. A chair scraped against the wood floor, footsteps approached, and then I heard it. "So, after the tasting next week, we can meet with the designer," Mom's voice said, low but sharp enough to cut through the hum. Lily's reply followed, softer but laced with excitement. "It's going to be amazing, Mom. Our restaurant, finally." Our restaurant. The word sank into me like a cold blade. My hand froze mid-slice, the knife hovering above the board. My pulse surged in my ears, muffling the rest of the noise. By the time I managed to breathe again, they had already moved back toward the table, their voices swallowed by the rest of the party. I stared at the glossy red halves of the peppers, the knife still in my hand. They hadn't said my name, not once. No space for me in their plans, no acknowledgement that I'd stood in this kitchen for years, too. Why? I wasn't asking for Lily's spotlight, but was I always going to be the invisible one? The extra set of hands keeping the sauce from burning while they built dreams without me? A burst of laughter erupted from the dining room, snapping me back. I forced my body into motion, scooping the peppers into a bowl, stirring the sauce with slow, deliberate movements, as if controlling my pace might keep the ache in my chest from spilling out onto my face. The timer on the oven beeped, shrill, insistent, and I pulled out the garlic bread. The butter hissed and popped as I set the pan on the counter, the scent rising in a rich golden wave. I arranged the slices on a platter with the care of someone handling something fragile. When I carried it into the dining room, the conversation barely dipped. Lily leaned toward Mom, showing her something on her phone, their heads nearly touching. Plates were half empty, wine glasses full again, the table littered with crumbs and half-burnt candle stubs. I slid the bread into the empty space beside the tiramisu and murmured, "Here you go." No one looked up. I went back to the kitchen, the place that was somehow both my refuge and my cage. The hot water roared from the faucet as I rinsed the knife, steam curling around my fingers. The steady rush almost drowned out the chatter from the other room. Almost. For the next hour, I kept moving, clearing plates, stacking glasses, wiping stray drops of wine from the tablecloth. The rhythm of cleaning was mechanical, safe, until the guests began to leave. Each goodbye was met with warm hugs and promises of, "Let's do this again soon," the kind of sweetness that felt rehearsed. When the last door shut, the house fell into a strange kind of stillness. The candles flickered weakly, their flames thin and tired. The air was thick with the mingled scents of roasted meat and wine, sweet and heavy. I leaned against the counter, my palms flat against its cool surface. Rows of empty glasses stood like little soldiers awaiting orders. My hands were sore, my feet ached, and deep beneath all of that, a sharper pain pressed harder, one that had nothing to do with my body. I wondered if I'd ever be more than the extra hand in their perfect world. The house was finally quiet. Hours earlier, it had been filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the warm chaos of Mom's birthday party. Now the air felt heavier, still carrying the lingering scent of wine, garlic, and roasted meat. I moved through the dim hallway, my socks whispering against the hardwood floor. My body ached from hours on my feet, but Mom's sharp request as the last guest left still rang in my ears. "Mia, could you tidy up my room? I'm exhausted." Her bedroom door creaked open, spilling a thin line of yellow light across the hallway carpet. Inside, the room smelled faintly of her perfume, a soft, powdery floral, and something earthier, older, like cedar. The blinds were drawn halfway, letting in just enough streetlight to cast long shadows over the piles of coats and purses left on the bed earlier. A half-empty champagne flute sat on her nightstand, condensation sliding lazily down its stem. I started with the easy things, gathering stray wrapping paper, folding the cardigan she'd tossed on the chair, straightening the pillows. As I bent to pick up a scarf from the floor, I noticed the bed skirt had been pulled slightly askew. Something wooden peeked out from underneath, just a corner, almost hidden by the folds of fabric. I hesitated. Mom wasn't exactly the hide things under the bed type, but curiosity, small and insistent, pushed me to lift the bed skirt. A wooden box sat there, the kind you'd find in an antique store, smooth but scuffed, brass hinges dulled with age. My fingertips hovered over the lid for a moment, feeling the faint vibration of my own pulse. I told myself I was just making sure nothing got left out of place, that I'd open it, glance inside, and close it right back up. But when I lifted the lid, the faint scent of old paper and lavender sachets hit me, stirring something in my chest. Inside, there were a few folded napkins from restaurants I didn't recognize, a bundle of photographs bound with twine, and at the very bottom, a torn envelope. It was addressed to me. My name, Mia Carter, written in my grandmother's careful cursive. My stomach tightened. I hadn't seen her handwriting in years, not since before she passed away. The flap had already been ripped open, the paper inside creased and slightly yellowed. My fingers shook as I slid it out. The letter was short, only a few paragraphs, but each word burned. My grandmother had written to tell me she was leaving me an inheritance, money she wanted me to have for my own dreams when the time was right. She made it clear. This was for me alone, not for Lily, not for anyone else. I read it twice, the words blurring as my eyes stung. I'd never heard a word about this. Mom had never mentioned it, not once. If Grandma had left me something, why hadn't I received it? My pulse thudded in my ears. The realization came slowly, like a shadow stretching across the room. Mom had hidden this from me. She'd taken something that was meant for me, something from Grandma, and locked it away. The doorknob rattled. Before I could react, the door swung open. Mom stood there, still in her birthday dress, her lipstick slightly smudged, her eyes sharp and hard in the dim light. Her gaze went straight to the letter in my hands. "What are you doing?" Her voice was cold, stripped of the warmth she'd shown her guests all night. My voice caught in my throat. "I found this. It's from Grandma. Why didn't you tell me?" She crossed the room in 3 quick strides, yanking the letter from my fingers so fast the paper crinkled. "Don't touch my things," she snapped. Her words hit like a slap. I stared at her, my chest tight, my mind scrambling for air. "Your things? This is addressed to me." But she was already shoving the letter back into the box, slamming the lid shut with a force that made the brass hinges groan. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice low, almost a growl. I opened my mouth again, but the look in her eyes stopped me. It wasn't anger alone, it was something darker. Fear, guilt. Whatever it was, it made my skin prickle. She slid the box back under the bed, adjusting the bedskirt with quick, precise movements, as if erasing the moment entirely. When she straightened, she smoothed her dress, her breathing steady but shallow. "Go finish the dishes," she said, turning toward the door, "and next time, stay out of my room." I stood there long after she left, the silence pressing in from all sides. My hands were still trembling. Why would Mom hide this from me? I looked around her room, the family photos on the dresser, the stack of cookbooks by the chair, the faint glint of her phone screen lighting up with another congratulatory message from someone online. Everything here felt curated, controlled. How much else had she tucked away, just out of sight? I thought of Grandma's laugh, the way she used to slip me little notes in my lunchbox when I was a kid. She'd always made me feel like I mattered. And now, even after she was gone, Mom had found a way to take that from me too. The air in the room felt different now, thicker, hotter, like the oxygen had been replaced by something I couldn't breathe. I backed out slowly, my mind racing. I didn't know how deep this went, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about a letter, and I needed to find out what else she was keeping from me. The living room was dim, the kind of dim that makes the air feel thick. The only light came from the lamp in the corner, its orange glow softening the edges of the furniture and casting shadows that seemed to lean in, listening. The faint scent of fading perfume and leftover wine clung to the air, mixing with the smell of extinguished candles, a sweetness gone sour. Lily was curled into the corner of the couch, legs tucked under her, her phone cradled loosely in one hand. Her hair was loose, a few strands catching the light, and she looked perfectly at ease, like the evening had been nothing but good to her. I stood in the doorway, my pulse still hammering from what had happened upstairs. The torn letter from Grandma was seared into my mind, every word burned there. I didn't even bother sitting down. My hands were tight fists at my sides. "Lily," I said, my voice sharper than I expected. She looked up, eyebrows raised in mild curiosity. "What's up?" "I found a letter tonight," I said, stepping into the room. My throat was dry. "From Grandma, it was addressed to me. She left me money, an inheritance." I could feel my nails digging into my palms. Why didn't anyone tell me? Something flickered in her expression, too quick for anyone who wasn't watching closely. A flash of something like guilt, or maybe recognition. But then she leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, and a slow smirk curved her mouth. "Mia," she said, setting her phone down on the coffee table with deliberate care, "you think you'd do anything with that money? Mom says you'd just mess it up." Her words were delivered lightly, almost lazily, but each one felt like it had been sharpened beforehand. They slid under my skin, cutting as they went. "What's that supposed to mean?" My voice was tight. "It means," she replied, leaning back further into the cushions, "you've never exactly been great at managing things. Mom's just trying to protect you from yourself." "Protect me?" The word made my stomach turn. I could see Grandma's handwriting in my head, careful, loving, deliberate. Her words meant for me alone. And now here was Lily, echoing Mom's condescension like it was gospel. I took a slow step toward her, my voice low but shaking. "That money was mine, Lily. It was meant for me, and you knew." She shrugged, eyes sliding away to the side, deliberately avoiding mine. "It's not my problem." That sidelong glance told me more than if she'd confessed outright. She knew, and maybe she'd known for a long time. The air in the room felt heavier, charged with all the things we weren't saying. The faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the settling creaks of the house, even Lily's quiet, steady breathing. Every sound seemed too loud. My heart was pounding, the beat sharp and insistent in my ears. For a moment, I considered staying, pressing her until she cracked. But I knew if I stayed, the anger bubbling inside me might boil over into something I couldn't take back. I turned, without another word, and crossed the room, my footsteps loud against the wood floor. The basement door let out a long, complaining groan as I pulled it open. A draft of cool, musty air slid past me, smelling of damp cement, dust, and something faintly metallic. I flicked on the light, and the single bulb at the bottom of the stairs sputtered before holding steady, casting the space in a pale yellow glow. Shadows clung stubbornly in the corners, stretching up the walls and across the ceiling. I descended slowly, each wooden step groaning under my weight. Down here, the world above felt far away, muffled and distorted. The air was heavier, dense with the smell of old wood and paper, like a library no one had visited in decades. Grandma's old journals had to be here. I remembered them from when I was a kid, thick leather covers worn soft with years of use, filled with her looping handwriting. She always said she kept everything that mattered in those pages. If there was truth to be found, this was where it would be hiding. I crouched beside a stack of boxes, brushing a fine layer of dust from the lids. My hands moved quickly at first, rifling through brittle wrapping paper from old holidays, stacks of yellowed newspapers and chipped ceramic mugs I didn't remember ever seeing upstairs. The deeper I dug, the slower I moved. The air seemed to press closer, the silence deepening until even my own breathing sounded loud. Cobwebs laced the corners of the shelves, their fine threads catching the light like strands of silver. My fingers traced the edge of a warped cardboard box, and I pried the lid back. Inside was a pile of books, their spines cracked, the edges of the pages curled. The top one was bound in brown leather, the cover scuffed but solid. I lifted it carefully, dust rising in a faint cloud that tickled my nose. The leather was warm under my hands, as if it had been waiting for someone to pick it up. Above me, faintly, I heard footsteps crossing the floor. Lily moving from the living room to the kitchen. A moment later, she hummed a tune. Light, easy, like nothing had just happened. The sound made my jaw tighten. Her smirk flashed in my mind again, the exact angle of her mouth, the lazy cruelty in her tone. It was different from Mom's betrayal, but it cut just as deep. How deep did this go? I set the first journal down and reached for another, my fingers curling around its spine. Somewhere in these pages I might find the truth, not just about the inheritance, but about what else they'd taken from me without my knowing. And if Lily had been part of it all along, I was going to uncover every single piece. The basement wrapped around me like a damp, unwelcoming cave. The air was heavy, stale, and smelled of mildew, rust, and old paper that had been sitting untouched for years. Somewhere above, the faint creak of the house settling made me pause, listening, before the silence settled back over me again, thick and unbroken. The single bare bulb dangled from the ceiling, its chain swaying slightly, throwing a weak yellow light that barely reached the edges of the room. Everything beyond its circle was swallowed in deep shadow. I crouched low on the rough concrete, feeling the cold seep through my jeans until it numbed my knees. A sagging cardboard box sat in front of me, its corners softened and darkened from years of damp air. My hands sifted through its contents, brittle envelopes that crumbled at the edges, curled photographs whose colors had faded into ghostly outlines, receipts so worn they were almost blank. Each movement stirred small clouds of dust that shimmered briefly in the bulb's light before disappearing into darkness. Then my fingers brushed something different, solid, heavier than the rest. I pulled it out slowly, the weight familiar in a way that made my heartbeat thump harder. It was a folder, thick and sturdy, its once crisp edges dulled and softened with age. The cover was stained in places, and across the front, black marker bled into the fibers. Business contract. The letters were bold, deliberate, and for some reason, they made my stomach tighten. Balancing it on a nearby box, I eased it open. The first page was so pristine it almost didn't belong here, like it had been preserved on purpose. My eyes caught on the bold heading, Partnership Agreement. My breath caught in my throat. I skimmed downward until my gaze froze on the section for the initial investment. The number was so familiar it felt like it had been burned into my mind. I knew it instantly, down to the exact cent. It was the exact amount Grandma had promised me in her letter. A cold wave swept through me, followed by a slow burn that climbed from my chest into my throat. This wasn't some coincidence. Mom hadn't saved my inheritance for me. She had given it away. No, invested it. Into Lily's dream, not mine. My grandmother's gift to me had been signed over before I even knew it existed. I turned the pages more quickly now, the paper rasping under my fingers. There they were, 2 signatures. Mom's, with its bold, sweeping flourish, confident and unapologetic. Lily's, smaller and more careful, sitting neatly beside it. Above them, the date, months ago. The knowledge hit me like a punch. This wasn't a hasty decision. It was a plan, deliberate and neatly executed, hidden away where I'd never look. In my mind, I could hear them. Mom's voice calm, almost patronizing, explaining why it was for the best. Lily's quiet agreement, maybe even a smile, knowing I wouldn't find out until it was too late. Anger rose in me slowly, like water filling a sealed room, pressing against every inch of my chest until breathing felt shallow. I clenched the folder tighter, the sharp corners digging into my palms until they hurt. The urge to tear it in half was strong, to shred it so completely that the sight of it would stop haunting me. But another part of me, a colder, sharper voice, cut through the heat in my head. Don't destroy it. Use it. I slipped my phone from my pocket, the smooth plastic warm against my fingers. For a moment I just held it, my thumb hovering. Then the soft click of the camera broke the stillness. Flash after flash illuminated the dust floating in the air as I photographed every single page. The signatures, the numbers, the dates, they were mine now. My proof. When I finished, I closed the folder and smoothed my hand over its worn cover. Then I slid it back under the pile of forgotten papers in the box, tucking it exactly as I'd found it. Let them keep believing their secret was safe. I stayed crouched there, phone in hand, my pulse thudding in my ears. The hum of the old freezer in the corner seemed louder now, vibrating faintly through the floor. Somewhere above, a pipe gave a low groan, like the house itself knew what I'd uncovered. This wasn't just about the money anymore. They had stolen the future Grandma had imagined for me, the independence I'd been meant to have. They had taken my place in the family and given it to Lily, erasing me from my own story. I pushed to my feet, brushing my palms down my jeans. Dust clung stubbornly to my skin, gritty under my nails. The wooden stairs groaned under my weight as I climbed, the dim circle of light shrinking behind me until it was swallowed completely by darkness. When I stepped into the kitchen, the air felt wrong. It still smelled faintly of vanilla and fresh bread, but the comfort that scent used to bring was gone. The counters gleamed under the warm overhead light, but now they looked artificial, like a stage set meant to hide the truth just beneath the surface. I slid my phone into my pocket, curling my fingers around it until I could feel the edges pressing into my palm. The photos inside weren't just proof. They were my first weapon. They had taken everything, my money, my dreams, my place in this family, but they hadn't taken my will, and I was going to get it back. The cafe was small and quiet, the kind of place where the air always smelled like freshly ground coffee and warm pastries. A slow, mellow jazz tune hummed from a speaker near the counter, blending with the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. Dim yellow lights hung low above each table, casting soft circles of warmth over polished wood. I sat tucked into the far corner, my hands wrapped around a mug I hadn't taken a sip from, letting the steam curl up toward my face. The storm in my chest hadn't let up since I left the basement. My phone sat on the table, screen dark, but I kept glancing at it like the photos inside might suddenly vanish. Ethan arrived with the faint smell of rain clinging to his coat. He slid into the seat across from me, shaking a few stray droplets from his hair. "I got your message," he said quietly, setting his phone face down on the table. His voice was steady, but his eyes searched mine. "You said it was urgent?" I nodded, pushing my phone toward him. "You need to see this." He glanced at me once more before unlocking the screen. As he scrolled through the photos, the neat legal formatting, the bold black numbers, the signatures, I watched his expression shift from curiosity to something heavier. The background chatter of the cafe seemed to fade until all I could hear was the faint scrape of his thumb across the glass. "Mia," his voice was low, careful. "This isn't just a bad call or a misunderstanding. This was planned. And if what you told me about your grandmother's letter is true—" He stopped, leaning back in his chair, like he needed to create space for the weight of the thought. I pulled the mug closer, feeling the heat seep into my cold fingers. "They took everything, Ethan. Not just the money. Everything I could have done with it. Everything she wanted for me." He exhaled slowly, his gaze flicking toward the rain-speckled window. "I believe you, and I'll help you. But you need to be ready. This could tear your family apart, Mia." The words hit harder than I expected. I stared at the swirl of steam rising from my coffee, thinking about the basement, the signatures, the way the numbers seemed to burn into my eyes. "They already did that," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan leaned in, lowering his tone. "I've seen your mom do this before, not with money but with Lily. I was at your place once back in high school. Lily had this art project she was so proud of. Your mom talked to her about it for maybe 10 minutes. By the end of that conversation, Lily had decided to drop it for something more practical." He paused, watching my reaction. The way she spoke, it wasn't advice. It was like she was rearranging Lily's thoughts without her even realizing it. My stomach tightened. "So you think she's been controlling her?" "I think your mom's been shaping people for a long time, Mia, steering them exactly where she wants them to go. If she's done that for years, you need to understand. This is bigger than one contract." We talked for a while after that, his voice calm and deliberate as he laid out the steps. Gather more evidence, make copies, store them somewhere safe, and be careful who I trusted. But even as he spoke, I noticed how his eyes kept flicking toward the door whenever someone walked in, like he was measuring the risks of being here with me. By the time I stepped outside, the drizzle had stopped, but the street was slick, reflecting the pale light of the lamps. The night was quiet except for the faint hum of traffic blocks away. I zipped my jacket against the cool air and started down the block, Ethan's warning playing over and over in my head. Halfway home, I slowed. A dark sedan was parked across the street from my house. It wasn't one I recognized. The windows were tinted, but under the streetlight's weak glow, I could just make out a figure in the driver's seat. A shadow in a dark coat. They weren't on a phone. They weren't eating. They weren't moving. Just sitting there, facing my house. I told myself it could be nothing. A visitor for a neighbor, a delivery driver waiting for a text. But something in the stillness felt wrong. They didn't shift. They didn't even pretend to look away. The longer I stood there, the more certain I became that their eyes were on me. My keys dug into my palm as I held them tight. The air felt colder now, each breath a small puff in the dark. The street was too quiet. Even the usual rustle of leaves seemed to have stopped. Fear prickled at the base of my neck, but it didn't push me back. It pushed me forward. Whoever they were, whatever reason they had for sitting there, I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me run. I drew a slow breath, forced my steps to stay even, and walked to my front door without looking back. My heart pounded in my ears, but my hand was steady when I fit the key into the lock. Someone was watching me, but I wouldn't let them stop me. The kitchen was dim except for a single cone of warm light pooling over the center of the table. That glow used to mean safety. Late-night cocoa after storms, whispered jokes until our sides hurt, the smell of fresh bread cooling on the counter. Tonight, it was a merciless spotlight, exposing every fracture between us. Even the air felt different, heavy, almost damp, as if it had been holding its breath all day, waiting for this moment to explode. I didn't bother closing the front door gently. It slammed behind me with a hollow bang that seemed to reverberate all the way into my bones. My footsteps were sharp against the tile, each one a deliberate strike, my pulse hammering in sync. The folder in my hand was warped at the edges, the cardboard softened under the pressure of my grip. Mom stood at the counter, her back to me, the steady thud of her knife against the cutting board marking time like a metronome. The scent of garlic and onions was thick in the air, normally comforting, but now it clung to my throat, making it hard to breathe. Lily sat at the table, hunched over her phone, her hair falling forward in a curtain. The bluish glow lit her face, but when she glanced up and saw me, her fingers froze mid-scroll, her phone suspended like she'd forgotten how to move. I crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides and dropped the folder onto the table with a crack that made the salt shaker jump. "You stole my money!" My voice came out raw, sharper than I intended, but I didn't pull it back. Mom's hand stilled mid-slice. Her face paled for the briefest second before her chin lifted, eyes hardening like steel. "Mia, lower your voice." "No!" My palm slammed against the table, the cool wood pressing into my skin, grounding me just enough to keep me from shaking apart. "Don't you dare tell me to lower my voice after what you've done." Her eyes darted toward the folder, papers jutting out at the edges. She didn't reach for it. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what it was. "I did what was best for you," she said, her tone clipped, each word like a small, sharp blade. She set the knife down with a decisive clink. "You can't handle that kind of money. I wasn't about to watch you waste it." "Waste it?" My laugh was brittle, breaking apart halfway through. "It was mine. Grandma wanted me to have it. You had no right." "I had every right," she cut in, her voice cold and absolute. "You're my daughter. I'm not going to let you ruin your life." Her words were a slap, but the deeper wound came from somewhere else. I turned to Lily. She wasn't looking at me. Her phone now lay face down on the table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her shoulders were rounded forward, as if she could fold herself small enough to disappear. "You knew," I said, my voice low, every syllable deliberate. Her eyes flicked to mine, and that single glance was all I needed. Guilt was etched into every line of her face, impossible to mask. "You knew," I repeated, louder this time, my pulse roaring in my ears. "All this time, you knew what she did, and you said nothing." "Mia!" Her voice cracked around my name, thin and weak, breaking before it could form a sentence. "You both betrayed me!" The words erupted from me, ricocheting off the walls, filling the space until I felt them press back into my chest. Mom stepped forward, planting her palms firmly on the table like she could pin the truth down. "You're being dramatic. Families make sacrifices. One day you'll understand." "Sacrifices?" The word burned as it left my mouth. "That's what you call stealing from me? That's what you call letting my own sister watch it happen?" Lily flinched at that, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak, but no sound came. Her silence screamed louder than any words could. The air pressed in on me, dense and suffocating. The scent of cooking was still there, but underneath it was something acrid, sharp, like the ghost of smoke after a fire. The hum of the refrigerator, once background noise, now throbbed in my ears like a second heartbeat. I looked at the table, our table, the one that had held birthday cakes with crooked candles, the one we'd leaned on through laughter and tears, the one where I'd thought we were a family. Now it was a battlefield, scarred by an invisible war, its surface holding wounds that would never heal. Lily's silence hurt more than Mom's lies, because she was my sister. My hands trembled as I grabbed the folder, clutching it to my chest like a shield. Neither of them tried to stop me. Mom's mouth was a rigid, unyielding line. Lily's eyes followed me, glistening with something that might have been regret, but it was far too late for that. I turned and walked out. The warm circle of light shrank behind me until the hallway swallowed me whole. My footsteps softened on the carpet, but in my head my voice still rang out. "You both betrayed me," told in my mind again and again, relentless, like a bell that refused to stop ringing. I closed my bedroom door and leaned against it, the wood cool against my back. My breath was uneven, still jagged from the storm downstairs. The folder sat on my desk under the weak glow of my lamp, its edges curling like it was trying to hide its own contents. My room had always been my refuge, but tonight it felt smaller, tighter, as if the air itself was pressing in on me. The only sound was the faint, steady hum of the heater in the corner, until my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I almost didn't look. My hands were still trembling from the kitchen showdown, my pulse loud in my ears. But the screen lit up, and when my eyes found the message, my stomach dropped so fast it made me dizzy. "Stop digging or your family's done." No name, no number I recognized. Just those words, short, sharp, final, burning in white against the black screen. A chill ran down the back of my neck, slow and deliberate, like an ice cube tracing my spine. My fingers tightened around the phone until my knuckles ached. It wasn't just a warning, it was a message from someone who knew exactly where to hit so it would hurt the most. The kind of threat that wasn't meant to scare me off for a day, but to shut me down for good. I sat down on the edge of my bed, the mattress dipping under me. The heater's low hum suddenly felt louder, almost menacing. For a few seconds I considered deleting the text, pretending I'd never seen it. But the anger from earlier was still burning in my chest, hot and unyielding. If they wanted me to stop, it meant I was close. Before I could overthink it, my thumb hovered over Ethan's name, and I hit call. He picked up on the second ring. "Mia, you okay?" "I need you to keep digging into the contract," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't just that I didn't want anyone to overhear. It felt like the walls themselves might betray me. Something's not right, and now someone's trying to scare me off. There was a pause on the other end, followed by the rustle of papers. "Scare you how?" "I got a text," I said, swallowing hard. "Anonymous. It says, 'If I don't stop, my family's done.'" The silence stretched for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Ethan spoke, his voice low and steady. "That means you're onto something. Give me an hour." I ended the call but didn't move. The message still glared at me from the screen, a digital ghost I couldn't banish. I kept staring, almost expecting the words to shift or fade, but they stayed exactly the same, seared into the glass. While I waited, I tried flipping through the folder again. My fingers grazed the rough edges of paper, but the threat kept circling my thoughts. Who sent it? Mom? No. Too risky for her. Lily? No, she wouldn't have the nerve. It had to be someone else, someone who had more to lose than I realized. When my phone buzzed again, I jumped. My heart gave a sharp kick before I saw Ethan's name. "I found something," he said, his tone clipped. "I compared the signature on the will to your grandma's other documents. Mia, it's not her handwriting. Your mom forged it." The room seemed to tilt slightly, like the floor had shifted under me. "You're sure?" I asked, even though deep down I already believed him. 100%, he said. "I ran it through analysis software. The letter shapes, the pressure, it doesn't match. Your mom didn't just take the money. She rewrote your grandma's last wishes." I closed my eyes. My pulse was so loud I could barely hear him now. The folder on my desk felt dangerous, almost radioactive, like holding it too long could burn me. That's when I heard it. A low, steady rumble outside my window. Not loud enough to be passing traffic. Too constant. I walked to the curtain and eased it back an inch. There it was, the same car I'd seen before. Dark, parked at the curb like it had grown roots, headlights off. But in the faint spill of a street lamp, I could make out the silhouette of someone in the driver's seat, motionless, watching. My breath caught in my throat. The streetlight down the block flickered in an irregular rhythm, throwing the car into alternating shadows and light, like it was appearing and disappearing with every blink. I pressed the phone to my mouth. "Ethan, it's here again." "What is?" "The car. The one I told you about. Same spot." He didn't hesitate. "Stay inside. Lock your door. I'm coming. 15 minutes. I let the curtain drop back into place. My pulse was erratic now, spiking every time I thought about that driver's stillness. My phone was warm against my palm, but the earlier text felt like it had leaked cold into the room. Part of me wanted to curl up and hide, to let someone else take over, but the other part, the part still burning from the kitchen, was louder. If they were willing to threaten me, it meant they were scared. I sat back on the bed, eyes fixed on the folder. "They're scared of me now," I thought, the words steady in my head like an anchor. "But I'm not stopping!" My phone buzzed again, and for a heartbeat my stomach twisted, thinking it was another threat. But it was just Ethan. On my way. I inhaled slowly, letting the air fill me until my shoulders dropped slightly. Outside, the car's engine still purred, patient, steady, unbothered, like it knew it could wait me out. But so could I. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not just in temperature. The air carried a heaviness, like every breath I took had to pass through layers of judgment. The walls were a sterile beige, lined with dark wood panels that seemed to swallow sound, but the overhead lights were merciless. They bleached the room of warmth, casting stark shadows that made every twitch, every glance, impossible to hide. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my fingers wrapped around a pen I hadn't used, just something to hold so I wouldn't clench my fists. Beside me, my lawyer shuffled papers, his whispers steady and low, but my focus was on the stack in front of us, Frank's original will, the forged contract, and the handwriting analysis that tied it all together. Evidence, truth, proof that I hadn't imagined any of it. Across from me, Mom sat stiff-backed in a navy suit, her hair pinned neatly, her mouth pulled into a thin, unmoving line. She looked like she was carved from ice. Lily sat next to her, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap, I thought her knuckles might crack. She didn't look at me. The bailiff's voice cut through the air. "All rise." We stood as the judge entered, his robe sweeping behind him, his expression unreadable. The shuffle of shoes on tile echoed in the cavernous room before the command came. "You may be seated." My lawyer presented our case first, methodical, precise. He laid out the timeline, introduced the original will Frank had recovered, and then the forged contract. The judge examined them closely, his eyes flicking from one page to the next. When the handwriting expert testified, pointing out the inconsistencies, I caught Mom's jaw tightening. When it was Mom's turn to speak, she didn't hesitate. She rose, her voice carrying easily in the room. "My daughter is ungrateful," she said, gesturing toward me like I was a stranger. "Everything I did was to protect her from herself. She's young, impulsive. I couldn't let her throw away what her grandmother built." Ungrateful child. The words hit harder than I expected. It wasn't the first time she'd said them, but here, in front of strangers, they felt heavier, like she was trying to paint me as reckless to justify everything. My lawyer objected, but the judge allowed her to continue. She spoke with conviction, her version of events polished, almost believable if you didn't know her. I gripped the pen tighter. Then the defense called Lily. My chest tightened. I hadn't been sure if Lily would even testify. She walked slowly to the witness stand, her eyes fixed on the floor. When she was sworn in, her voice barely carried, but the microphone caught it. "Lily," the defense attorney said, "did you see your mother forge the will?" Lily's fingers twisted in her lap. "No," she said softly. The words landed like a stone in my gut. I dropped my gaze to the table. Of course. Why would she? "But," she continued, her voice trembling, "I have something." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small recorder. My breath caught. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the faint click as she pressed play. Mom's voice filled the room, tinny through the speakers, but unmistakable. "I changed it," the recording said. "She doesn't deserve it. All she's ever done is take, and I'm not letting her take this too. Not when I've given her everything. Not when she thinks she's better than me." The words dripped with venom, more than I'd ever heard from her even in our worst fights. Gasps rippled through the room. My lawyer straightened, his pen frozen mid-note. The judge's eyes sharpened, turning to Mom, whose face had gone pale under the harsh lights. "Where did you get this?" the defense attorney asked. "I recorded her," Lily said, her voice breaking but steady enough to carry. She admitted it. "I kept it because I didn't know what to do. She's my mom, but Mia's my sister." I swallowed hard, my throat thick. Relief surged through me. Finally, here was the proof no one could twist or deny, but it tangled with something else. Hurt, because Lily had known. She'd carried this all along while I was drowning. Mom's lawyer tried to object, to claim the recording was taken without consent, but the judge overruled. The truth was out, and no amount of scrambling could shove it back into the dark. The judge's gaze stayed on Mom. "This is serious," he said, his voice low but cutting through the silence. "Forgery of a will is a criminal offense. This court rules in favor of the plaintiff." My knees felt weak. The tension in my shoulders loosened, replaced by a rush of air I hadn't realized I'd been holding. We'd won. I had been telling the truth all along. But when I glanced at Lily, she didn't smile. She didn't even meet my eyes. Her hands were clasped in her lap again, her head bowed like she was bracing for a storm. I wanted to thank her. I wanted to ask her why it took so long, why she waited until the breaking point to finally stand beside me. As the gavel came down, the sound sharp in the air, I felt the relief settle in my chest. But it wasn't pure. It was tangled, complicated, edged with the question I couldn't shake. Lily told the truth. But why did she wait so long? The old kitchen hadn't changed much. Same scuffed linoleum floors, same faded curtains with tiny yellow flowers, same faint smell of coffee clinging stubbornly to the air. But it felt different now, smaller somehow, as if the walls had soaked in every fight, every whispered slight, every betrayal, and were now pressing it all back onto me. The late afternoon sun filtered in through the window above the sink, streaked with grime that caught the light in hazy patterns. The golden glow should have felt warm, but it only painted the room in a false gentleness that didn't match the weight in my chest. Lily was already there when I stepped inside. She stood near the table, her hands gripping the back of a chair like she needed something solid to hold on to. Her shoulders were drawn tight, and her gaze was fixed on a small scratch in the tabletop. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes seemed to waver between bracing for impact and silently begging for something softer. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't the kind you could mistake for peace. It was thick, heavy, and alive with everything we'd never said. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant tick of the clock above the doorway, and beneath it all, my own heartbeat drumming in my ears. I took a slow breath, the air tasting faintly of dish soap, the same brand Mom had always bought, sharp and citrusy. "Why here?" I asked finally, my voice low but edged with steel. Her eyes dropped back to the table. "Because this is where it started," she murmured. I pulled a chair back, the legs scraping across the floor, but I didn't sit. Sitting felt too much like settling in, like giving this moment more comfort than it deserved. She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing, then lifted her gaze to meet mine. "I was scared of losing Mom, Mia. I was wrong." The words came out shaky, uneven, like she'd been rehearsing them for weeks but still couldn't make them land the way she wanted. Her eyes glistened, and her voice broke in the middle, just enough to make me think the tears were real. For half a second, I wanted to let those words be enough. I wanted to believe them, to let them wipe away the years of silence and hurt. But my mind wouldn't let me. Images flashed. Her smirk when Mom belittled me, the way she'd looked away when I'd begged her for help, the unbearable quiet when she could have spoken up. "Scared of losing Mom?" I repeated, my tone sharper now, cutting through the false softness. "So you chose to lose me instead?" She winced, her grip on the chair tightening until her knuckles went white. I didn't mean to choose. I thought—" She stopped, shaking her head as if she could rattle loose the right words. "I thought if I stayed quiet, things would go back to normal. I didn't think it would go this far." I let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow in the stillness. "Normal? You mean Mom's still taking what isn't hers? Still making me the villain while you sit there and pretend you don't hear it?" Her tears spilled over, rolling down her cheeks in slow, uneven lines. She took one small step toward me. "I was wrong," she said again, this time barely above a whisper, like she thought repeating it might finally make it enough. I studied her face. There was guilt there, raw, unshielded, but guilt didn't change the fact that she'd let me drown and only threw the rope when the water was already at my chin. "Do you know what it felt like?" I asked, my voice quieter now but sharper in a different way. "Standing in that courtroom, hearing you say no? Thinking you'd picked her side for good?" Her lips trembled. "I was afraid," she admitted. "I didn't want to be alone with her anger. You know how she gets." "Yes," I said, my jaw tightening. "I know exactly how she gets. That's why I needed you." The words landed between us like stones, heavy and unmoving. She turned her head, swiping at her cheeks with the back of her hand. The room seemed to close in a little more, the air almost too thick to breathe. I let my eyes drift to the counter, the one where we'd once lined up mugs of cocoa, where we whispered secrets late at night, where we thought we were on the same team. Every corner of this kitchen carried a memory. Now, it carried this moment too. "I wanted to forgive you," I said finally, my voice low and steady. "But your words can't erase the years of silence." Her head snapped up at that, hope flickering in her eyes, fragile and desperate. But I didn't give her a reason to hold on to it. I stepped back from the table. The chair legs groaned softly against the floor as I pushed it in, the sound almost too loud in the quiet. Lily's breath caught. "Mia!" I shook my head. "Not today." She didn't move. I didn't look back, but I could hear her crying, small, broken sobs that seemed to sink into the very walls, the kind you couldn't scrub away no matter how hard you tried. When I stepped out of the kitchen, the hallway light felt colder, sharper, but the air was easier to breathe. My chest still ached, though, the kind of ache that comes from wanting two impossible things at once, to let go and to hold on. Outside, the sun was sinking low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. The air was cool against my skin, and for the first time in days, the noise in my head quieted just enough for me to hear the sound of my own footsteps. The court's ruling landed like the final slam of a door I'd been pushing against for years. Mom and Lily were ordered to repay my inheritance, and Mom was sentenced to probation. On paper, I had won, but there was no rush of triumph, no sweet satisfaction like the kind you see in movies. The word victory tasted flat in my mouth, like cold coffee left too long on the counter. Still, holding the judgment in my hands meant something. It meant the world finally agreed I hadn't been imagining everything. That alone was enough to steady my breath. A month later, I moved into my own place, a small apartment on the third floor of a building that smelled faintly of fresh paint and someone else's cooking. The hallway creaked underfoot, and the old brass doorknob to my unit turned with a stubborn twist. Inside, the walls were stark white, almost too bright in the morning sun, but they felt like a blank page waiting for my story. Ethan carried in the heavier boxes, teasing me about the absurd number of mixing bowls I owned for someone who barely had a couch. The kitchen was small, just one narrow counter, a pair of cabinets, a fridge that hummed like it had survived 3 lifetimes, and an oven with dials worn smooth from years of use. But it was mine. There were no footsteps pacing behind me, no sudden voices slicing through the air, no constant sense that something could be taken the moment I turned away. The quiet here wasn't oppressive, it was safe. With part of the repaid money, I enrolled in a cooking course. It wasn't about becoming a chef. It was about reclaiming something that had been stolen without me even realizing it. Cooking had always been Mom's domain, her way of controlling the table, the conversation, the family. Now, with every clean slice through a ripe tomato, every firm press of dough into a perfect circle, I was making something that belonged entirely to me. On my first Saturday in the apartment, I opened the kitchen window and let the city breathe into the room. Outside, the world was alive. Distant sirens, a child's laugh, the low murmur of a couple arguing good-naturedly on the sidewalk. But inside, the only sounds were the soft scrape of my whisk against the bowl and the occasional tap of Ethan's pen as he worked at the table. I was making a vanilla cake the instructor swore was impossible to ruin. The scent began as a faint sweetness, then deepened, curling through the air until it seemed to press gently against my skin. That smell. It didn't just remind me of freedom. It was freedom. I didn't have to glance over my shoulder here. I didn't have to brace myself for a sharp voice calling my name from the other room. I didn't have to wonder what deal was being struck behind closed doors. And yet, the past has a way of finding cracks. It came to me that night in a dream. I was back in the old kitchen, the one with the faded curtains and the linoleum floor worn thin in the same spot by the sink. Mom stood at the counter, her back to me, but I could feel her gaze even before she turned. When her eyes met mine, they were exactly as I remembered, hard, cutting. But there was something else buried there. Pain? Regret? Or was that just my imagination trying to soften her? The air in that dream was heavy, carrying the stale scent of old coffee and something bitter I couldn't name. I woke tangled in my sheets, my heart thudding against my ribs. Streetlight shadows crawled slowly over the ceiling, and I stared up at them. The memory of her stare lodged deep in my chest. Would there ever be a day when she wasn't in my head? Could forgiveness ever be more than a word people use to make peace with themselves? The next morning, I padded barefoot into the kitchen. Pale sunlight spilled over the counter, lighting up the glass jar of flour I'd bought because it looked like it belonged in a real kitchen. I laid out the ingredients for another cake: eggs, butter, sugar, my hands moving without thought. The rhythm of the work was grounding, the tap of an egg on the counter, the satisfying whoosh as the whisk cut through the batter, the steady thump of the knife on the cutting board. Every slice felt like severing another thread of their lies, but no matter how precise my cuts, I couldn't tell if I was slicing away the pain or just working around it. Lily's face rose in my mind then, her expression in the courtroom when she pressed play on that recording. Her voice had trembled, but she'd spoken. She had done the right thing, but she had waited so long that the gesture felt like a bandage pressed over a wound that had already scarred. Would we ever sit down in the same room again without the air turning heavy? Did I even want to try? The oven timer rang, breaking the spiral. I opened the door, and a wave of warm, sweet air enveloped me. The vanilla was richer now, layered with the faint butteriness of the cake. It wrapped around me like something solid, something I could hold on to. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in until my shoulders loosened. Ethan appeared in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame. "Smells like you're finally home," he said with a smile that reached his eyes. I didn't answer right away. My gaze swept the counters, the cake rising steadily in its pan, the stack of clean plates ready to be set on a table of my own. This was my kitchen now, my rules, my life. And yet, under the warm hum of the oven and the sweetness in the air, the question lingered, quiet but steady. Was I ready to let the past stay behind me, or was I still letting it guide every step? For now, I decided, it was enough to keep whisking, keep slicing, keep breathing in the vanilla until I believed it truly belonged to me. The hum of the industrial mixer filled the culinary school kitchen, blending with the faint hiss of ovens and the rhythmic clatter of metal bowls. Stainless steel counters reflected the bright overhead lights, and the air was warm, thick with the mingling scents of sugar, butter, and yeast. Outside the tall windows, late afternoon sunlight slanted in at a sharp angle, painting golden stripes across the floor tiles. My classmates' voices rose and fell around me, laughter, instructions, the occasional exasperated sigh, but I barely registered any of it. All my attention was on the single sheet of paper lying in front of me, its edges curling slightly under the heat of the kitchen. I'd been staring at it for 10 minutes, pen balanced between my fingers. The first 2 words, "Dear Mom," were already slightly smudged where my hand had lingered too long. 2 words that felt heavier than any cake I had ever lifted. The rest of the letter poured out almost without conscious thought. My pen moved quickly, scratching across the page in uneven lines. I wrote everything I had carried for years, the truths I'd never dared to speak aloud, the forged will, the inheritance stolen under the guise of family loyalty, the way she had turned Lily into her silent accomplice instead of my sister. I described the humiliation of standing in court, the sting of hearing her call me ungrateful while her lies unraveled in front of strangers. I even wrote about the quieter wounds, those nights lying awake, wondering if I was simply too difficult, too unlovable to be worth her kindness. As the words spilled out, the kitchen faded. The metallic tang of the air, the heat radiating from the ovens, even the sharp tap of knives on cutting boards, it all blurred into a low, distant hum. My handwriting grew more jagged the faster I wrote, each sentence pulling another memory from the shadows. When I finally stopped, my hand was cramping, my shoulders tense, my breath uneven. The page was full, front and back, the ink still glistening in places. Reading it over, the words looked like they could cut straight through her, each one a blade forged from years of silence. But as I stared at them, something shifted. I pictured her reading it. Would she understand? Or would she skim the first few lines and toss it aside, telling herself, and anyone who'd listen, that I was exaggerating again? I imagined her smirk, the way she might lean back in her chair, shaking her head and muttering about how I still couldn't let things go. The thought tightened something deep in my chest. Sending her this letter felt like handing her my pain wrapped neatly in paper, offering her the satisfaction of knowing she could still get to me, and I realized I didn't want her to have that power. The letter held my pain, but tearing it freed me. I slid my fingers along the edge of the paper and ripped it in half. The sound was sharp, startling in my quiet corner. I tore it again and again, until my lap and the counter were littered with small, jagged pieces that no one could piece back together. I gathered them in my hands, tiny fragments of years I would never get back, and dropped them into the trash. A strange lightness followed. Not joy, not forgiveness, just release, like stepping out of a room I didn't realize had been locked. I turned back to my station. My first cake of the day was cooling on its rack, a simple vanilla sponge with golden edges and a springy surface. I slid a knife cleanly through it, the blade gliding without resistance. A neat slice landed on a small white plate. The scent rose immediately, warm, sweet, familiar, curling into the air around me until I felt like I could breathe it in as deeply as I wanted. I took a bite. The softness melted on my tongue, sweetness unfolding first, then a faint bitterness at the back, just enough to make me pause. I let out a small, knowing smile. It was my life in a single bite, sweet moments threaded with something sharp, a reminder that healing doesn't erase what happened. As I stood there, fork in hand, I realized I wasn't anyone's shadow anymore. I wasn't the girl shrinking in the background while family secrets filled the air. I wasn't the sister waiting for rescue, or the daughter trying to earn love that had always been conditional. I was just me. The sounds of the kitchen slowly returned, laughter from the table near the windows, the thud of dough against a counter, the ring of an oven timer. Life moved on, and for the first time in years I felt myself moving with it. Still, a question lingered at the edges of my thoughts. How many others were where I had been, silenced, doubting themselves, carrying wounds too deep to name? How many were hiding them behind polite smiles, waiting for the day they could finally speak? I glanced at the trash bin beside me, at the torn letter buried under coffee grounds and paper towels. Some stories never get told, some voices never break through the walls built around them, but mine had. How many others are hiding family wounds, waiting to break their silence? Like, subscribe and share your story. Let's amplify these voices together.